This is how I built a miniature skate park almost entirely by myself in my backyard. A few years ago, I built this really cool tennis court themed ramp in the backyard of my first house I bought. I love this ramp and the memories it brought, but sadly I had to move. The upside was that the place I was moving to had a backyard with the perfect place to build a much larger ramp, which would allow me the space to add features such as a bank in the middle and a hubba to improve my ledge skills, since that's a part of skating I've always wanted to improve at. I also wanted to expand the ramp from 8 foot to 12 feet wide, which would allow me to actually grind on the quarter pipes as opposed to mainly just doing stall tricks. The first and most obvious setback would be the cost. Since building a ramp this big would be very expensive and the skate light for it would cost thousands of dollars, I didn't really think there was a way I could make it happen. That was until my local skate shop, Compound Skate Shop, closed down about a week into me living at this house. I saw that the ramp that they used was listed for free on Marketplace, so I jumped on the opportunity and offered them $500 to save it for me. I then spent the next 2 weeks disassembling this ramp by hand and loading it onto my 4x6 trailer pulled by my 2008 Volvo S60. Where there's a will, there's a way, but I do think that it's important to note that before starting a project this big, unless you have a set plan to knock it out with a group of friends on a specified weekend, most likely you'll be working on this alone for the majority of the time, unless you want to deal with the logistics of lining up you and your carpenter best friend's schedule. I only say this to prepare you so that you will consider your own abilities before deciding whether to buy a ramp new or to build one from scratch. The plan was to combine this ramp with my ramp that I already had in order to save money, but as you'll be able to see in the time lapses, I pretty much eventually had to replace everything because all the plywood turned out to be too rotten to reuse. Take this bit of advice from my multiple past experiences buying and moving ramps. Don't buy a used ramp unless it is either kept solely indoors or the skate light and coping alone is worth what you're paying for it. Something this size is almost always going to be more trouble than it's worth. Keep in mind that these ramps were typically not built with deconstruction in mind. The order in which I did things may have been a little bit unconventional. Usually you'd probably want to lay down your leveling blocks before assembling anything, but I just wasn't sure if the dimensions of the different sections would change as I built them, and I wanted to see how they looked together. So in order to know exactly how far apart to put the blocks, I built the frame of each section individually before doing any real leveling. Although I ended up replacing and resizing a lot of these ramps multiple times in order to make them flow well together, this method gave me an idea of the layout of everything. To get the dimensions right, I found a skate park with a similar design to what I wanted and took precise measurements of it. I also used the ramp pieces I already had as stencils since the radiuses from both of the ramps of the disassembled ramps were pretty perfect for what I wanted. I then altered both of the quarter pipes slightly and then raised the bigger quarter pipe up just a little bit to give me more speed to hit the box, but besides that, I pretty much left everything how it was. I used a truck coupon on my dad to get him to deliver a whole bunch of pressure treated 2x4s. This was about at the point where I realized I should have used all new lumber as opposed to trying to save a bunch of repurposed, non-weather treated wood. The biggest mistake in this whole project was using non-weather treated plywood for the sides and part of the top. I found some higher grade plywood from a local seller thinking it was a water resistant kind, but I soon learned it may have delaminated faster than normal plywood would have. I couldn't return any of this wood at this point, so I stupidly decided to move forward. I did end up painting the plywood with roofing paint, which will help some, but ultimately I'll have to replace all the plywood in the coming years, so avoid this mistake at all costs. Once I got the majority of the components made, I started to level. I'm definitely not the best person to ask how to do this part because it's almost always the most difficult part for me. I'd love for someone to make a good tutorial on this for people with uneven yards like myself. But essentially, I just dug out where I wanted the center blocks to go and made sure each one was level. I then went in and stacked smaller blocks on each base block until each corner was level. It's important that all of the bottom sides of the ramp are off the ground as much as possible. This will allow airflow under the ramp, which helps dry out the ramp, essentially extending the life of your ramp by years. Although moisture is unavoidable, you still want to try to mitigate it as much as possible. This is why I also built the ramp at a slight angle. If the ramp is too level, the water will sit and puddle on the ramp. I did this by getting the ramp perfectly level all around and then adding shims underneath to lift one side up evenly. To build the smaller floating quarter pipe, I had to temporarily get it level. I did this by screwing it to some temporary 2x4 supports. Once I got it level, I added in the larger 4x4 legs directly to the center blocks below and then added cross and diagonal supports like you would for a normal quarter pipe. I reused some old plastic decking material from the old ramp to add to the top of the deck. I really like the way this stuff looks and feels. It slides amazing and lasts forever. I even added a little frame of decking material around it to make it look like an actual porch. The box is pretty simple. I just screwed some 2x4s vertically to the frame of the ramp and then framed some 2x4s around them to make the shape of the cross and down ledge. I found that the decking material I used for the platforms grinds super well even without wax, so I put them up vertically with just the top lip exposed. This lip will keep you locked into grinds much better than if you put the deck flat on the top because of the beveled edge. It's a lot cheaper and easier to work with this than angled iron, and I almost prefer the grind, so I definitely recommend trying this. Here I just added these little vertical metal rods to the back fence to make the ramp more aesthetic. You basically just install these little brackets into the bottom and top 2x4s. You then screw the bottom in, set your rods on, and then sandwich it with the top rods and screw it off. This is much easier with a friend as the rods want to move around when putting the top piece on. The plywood layer can be tedious and is maybe the step I would most advise you to get a friend's help with. The main tip that I can offer is for the flat parts of the ramp, use 3/4 inch plywood to save some screws and time, but for the curved parts of the ramp, use 2 sheets of 3/8 inch plywood. This way the wood's not too thick to bend. Also be sure the plywood is horizontal and not vertical. This is because the grains of the board run along the length of the board, which make it much harder to bend a board hamburger style than hot dog style. I hope that all makes sense. I also make sure that the 2 layers of 3/8 plywood is offset slightly from another so that there's no overlapping cracks. For the skate light, I recommend bending it hamburger style. This way you don't have a horizontal crack in the middle of the transition. This will make the riding surface much smoother. Since I got all of my skate light secondhand, I had a couple of different colors I had to work with, so I decided to use green on the bank since I had the least amount of it. To screw skate light in, you only need to use small 1/2 inch screws, just long enough to get into the plywood below. Luckily, mine already had all the screws countersunk and drilled, but if yours doesn't, you must do this step to ensure that the screw heads aren't sticking out. That's pretty much everything for this video. I know I wasn't able to get into every detail about every single step, but I'm usually pretty fast at responding to your comments, and if a question gets asked enough and it gets enough attention, then I might even make a separate video addressing it. Let me know what you guys think about this video and also what I should add to this ramp next. If you like this video, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and maybe even subscribing if you want to see more videos like this in the future. It really helps out and allows me to do other cool stuff, such as building this concrete mini ramp in the middle of the woods. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.